You've been trained your entire life by the same fuel behavior. Gauge drops. Find a station. Fill it up. You don't wait for the fuel strategy to optimize. You pull in, run the card, put the nozzle in, and leave. That's just how fueling works. But if you've spent any time at a truck stop really watching, you've seen something that doesn't fit that pattern. A driver walking past a fuel island without stopping. A truck pulling off a highway to reach a specific chain station, passing two cheaper signs along the way. A partial fill. A deliberate, calculated partial fill when the tanks clearly have room for more. The obvious answer is they're hunting for cheap diesel. And that's partially true, but it's not the strategy. If it were just price hunting, they'd stop at whatever station had the lowest number on the sign. They don't. They have a specific destination, a specific amount, and a calculation that has nothing to do with what's on that sign. The real reason involves a federal tax agreement most people have never heard of. A physics constraint at 80,000 pounds that changes everything. And a decision-making system that runs on every truck in America before the driver ever touches the pump. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how that calculation works, and you'll realize it's been determining the price of almost everything in your refrigerator the whole time. Let's start with the answer everyone gives, and why it's only the beginning. The price explanation is real. Diesel fuel prices vary meaningfully across state lines, sometimes by 50 cents, sometimes by $1 or more per gallon, within a few miles of each other. And a long-haul truck, achieving somewhere around 6.5 miles per gallon, burns roughly 1,400 gallons in a single month. At 50 cents saved per gallon, that adds up to $700 per truck per month. For a fleet running 1,000 trucks, that is the kind of number that justifies an entire department dedicated to nothing but fuel purchasing. So yes, drivers are price conscious. Companies are price obsessed. That part is true. But here's what the price explanation misses. If this were purely about the number on the sign, the driver would stop at whatever station had the cheapest diesel on the way. No planning, no specific destination, just pull off at the low number. That is not what happens. The driver has a designated stop on their route, and they will pass cheaper stations to reach it. Sometimes they will pass a station selling diesel for less to reach one selling it for more. And that is not a mistake. The price visible on the sign is not the price the driver is actually calculating. There is a second price, invisible from the highway, deferred and paid on a quarterly government filing, that changes the math completely. Most people have never heard the 4 letters that explain it. But here is where the price explanation goes off the rails. The cheapest gallon right now is not always the cheapest gallon across the next 3 states. The reason why involves a federal tax system designed to solve a problem that was driving the entire industry toward collapse. IFTA, the International Fuel Tax Agreement. Most people driving past a truck have never encountered these 4 letters. Every long-haul carrier in America operates under them, every single day. Here's how it works. When you fill your car with gas, you pay the fuel tax for whatever state you're standing in. That's the end of it. Simple. But a truck crossing 8 states in a week can't work that way, because that truck's operation isn't contained inside one state's borders. Its costs are distributed across a dozen states, and each of those states has a claim on its fuel tax dollars. Under the International Fuel Tax Agreement, IFTA, the fuel tax a driver pays does not belong to the state where they physically filled the tank. It belongs to the states where they actually drove. Every quarter, the carrier files a return that calculates miles driven in each jurisdiction against fuel purchased in each jurisdiction. If you drove 5,000 miles in Pennsylvania, which carries one of the highest diesel tax rates in the country, exceeding 70 cents per gallon in combined fees, but you bought all your fuel in Georgia or New Jersey, you owe Pennsylvania the difference at the end of the quarter. And if you loaded up on fuel in a high-tax state before driving hundreds of miles in a low-tax state, you receive a credit. Difference matters. What this means in practice is that every fuel stop is a tax decision. The driver isn't just buying fuel, they are positioning their fuel supply ahead of the state lines they are about to cross. You load up cheap before entering expensive territory. It's like buying groceries before a trip to a city where everything costs twice as much, except the math is precise, it is tracked by a government system, and getting it wrong shows up as a quarterly tax liability. Fleet optimization software now runs this calculation in real time. It factors in current prices, IFTA, the International Fuel Tax Agreement, rates per state, miles remaining to destination, and contracted network pricing to calculate the exact stop where adding fuel is most economical, not just today, but across the full quarter. The driver's fuel card sometimes physically restricts them from purchasing at unapproved stops, directing them to the location the algorithm has already identified. But IFTA only solves half the problem. The other half is physics, and it has nothing to do with tax rates. Because the fuel in those tanks is not just money, it is weight. And weight at 80,000 pounds is a completely different kind of problem. Federal law caps every commercial truck at 80,000 pounds gross vehicle weight on the interstate highway system. Not approximately 80,000, not a rough guideline. Exactly 80,000 pounds, enforced at weigh stations by certified scales, with fines that begin the moment the needle goes over. Diesel fuel weighs approximately 7 pounds per gallon. A standard long-haul truck carries 2 saddle tanks, one mounted on each side of the frame, with combined capacity typically ranging from 200 to 300 gallons. Full tanks on a 300-gallon truck represent roughly 2,100 pounds of fuel weight. That number matters enormously because at 80,000 pounds, you are not making casual decisions about what goes on the truck. Here's the math a driver with a heavy load is running. The cargo is loaded. The tractor has a driver and equipment. Add it all up, and the truck is sitting at 77,500 pounds. They have 2,500 pounds of weight budget remaining before they hit the federal ceiling. At 7 pounds per gallon, that is approximately 350 gallons. If their tanks can hold 300, they are fine. They can fill up completely. But if the cargo is heavier, the calculation changes fast. Every gallon of fuel above what they need to reach their next strategic stop is a pound of cargo they legally cannot carry. For a driver with a heavy load, the decision is not, should I fill up? The decision is, how much can I add without going over? And the answer is, sometimes shockingly small. Then it gets worse. It is not just total weight that matters, it is where the weight sits. Federal law does not just limit total vehicle weight, it limits pure axle weight. The steering axle has a limit of 12,000 pounds. Drive tandems are limited to 34,000 pounds. Trailer tandems are limited to 34,000 pounds. Those limits apply independently. And those 2 saddle tanks, one on the left and one on the right, sit directly over the drive axles. Fill one tank more than the other, and the weight shifts laterally. One drive axle gets heavier than its mirror. That can push one side over the limit of 34,000 pounds, even when the total vehicle weight looks legal. Experienced drivers manage this by filling both tanks simultaneously or by alternating evenly, specifically to keep the axle distribution balanced. An uneven fill is not just a bad habit, and on a heavy load, it is a weigh station violation waiting to happen. There are documented accounts of drivers circling a truck stop deliberately, burning fuel, to bring an axle load back into compliance before hitting the next scale. Think about that. Driving in circles, burning expensive diesel, because the alternative is a fine for carrying too much of that same diesel. But here's what most people miss entirely. This system, the tax optimization, the weight management, the axle balancing, did not always exist. Before 1996, it could not have existed. The infrastructure that makes it possible was invented to solve a problem that had made the previous system almost unworkable. Go back before 1996, before the International Fuel Tax Agreement was fully in place. Interstate trucking operated under a patchwork of 48 different state fuel tax systems, each collecting taxes its own way. Some states required trucks to purchase fuel within their borders as proof of tax payment. Some sold trip permits at the state line. Some required prorate licenses. A carrier running coast to coast maintained active compliance files in up to 48 jurisdictions, each with different forms, different deadlines, and different rates that changed independently. The result was operationally absurd. Trucks crossing a state line would stop at the first fuel station specifically to create a fueling record in that state's compliance documentation, not because they needed fuel, but because the paperwork required evidence of a purchase within that border. Fueling for documentation. Stopping at a pump, not to power the engine, but to satisfy a government form. Industry groups at the time described the administrative burden on carriers as one of the single greatest obstacles to efficient interstate commerce. A dispatch team spent significant hours managing multi-state permit filings, not routing trucks, not planning loads, not moving freight, filing paperwork for 48 different governments. The International Fuel Tax Agreement was designed as the solution, phased in through the 1980s and made fully mandatory for all 48 contiguous states and 10 Canadian provinces by January 1st, 1996. It collapsed the 48 jurisdiction compliance nightmare into a single quarterly return filed with the driver's home base state license. One filing. Net taxes calculated and paid or refunded at the end of each quarter. But here's what happened. The behavior that existed before the International Fuel Tax Agreement, strategic fueling based on state-by-state economics, did not go away. It evolved. Before IFTA, drivers fueled strategically to satisfy documentation requirements. After IFTA, drivers fuel strategically to optimize quarterly tax liability. The reason changed. The calculation became smarter, faster, and more sophisticated. Fleet software now does in milliseconds what a carrier accountant used to spend days computing manually. The habit outlasted the original problem, and today it drives a decision-making system sophisticated enough to route an 80,000-pound vehicle to a specific pump at a specific truck stop in a specific state for a specific number of gallons, based on a calculation that includes 4 variables the driver on the road cannot see from their cab. And here's the part that connects this to you, because this system is not abstract logistics. You have been on the receiving end of it every week without knowing it. So here's where you actually land after all of this. You came in thinking truck drivers fuel up when they are low, like everyone else. Then you learned the price is not what is on the sign. There is a deferred quarterly tax calculation running underneath it. Then you learned that fuel is not just money, it is weight. And weight at 80,000 pounds is a constraint that determines how much diesel the truck can legally carry. Then you learned the system that makes this optimization possible was built to replace 48 separate states running 48 separate compliance nightmares that once required trucks to stop at pumps they did not need. Put it together, every fuel stop on every highway in America is the output of a real-time calculation, balancing tax liability, axle weight, route pricing, and quarterly International Fuel Tax Agreement IFTA exposure. The driver knows their cargo weight. They know the federal ceiling. They know which side of the next state line the cheap fuel is on. And they stop precisely where the math says to stop. That apple in your kitchen. That medication in your cabinet. That 2-day package that showed up without you thinking once about how it got there. Every one of them traveled in a truck whose driver made that calculation. The price you paid includes whether they got it right. That truck you watched pass the cheap station on the highway was not making a mistake. It was running a calculation you could not see. Now you can. And if you think fuel is where the hidden complexity ends, wait until we get into why the driver had no say in which route that fuel took them on and who actually made that call.